Anyway, so it was really interesting to be in New York, in Electric Lady, with a girl that I really was fascinated by, who had never sung at all. And I remember her thinking that I'd taken too long to sing a vocal, and she came out and, kicked me in the you-know-where. And I had to chase her, and I chased her around the block.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. Hello, Rockstars. It's your host, Lid Shaw, and welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to meet with recording professionals to hear their stories and learn from their experiences so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Robin Eaton, a songwriter, producer, poet, and artist from Nashville, Tennessee. He owns his own studio, Club Roar, and is also co-owner of Alex the Great Recording with Brad Jones, who was also my guest on episode 34. Robin has spent the past 40 years in and out of studios, record labels, jails, and foreign countries, where he has chased dreams and sometimes caught them. And I'm actually borrowing his poetic words right there straight from his bio. Beginning as a songwriter and artist signed to Warner France and then Z Island Records in New York City, he was also in the original Broadway production of Hair. After moving to Nashville in the 1980s and building Alex the Great, Robin went on to co-write and produce Jill Sobule's self-titled record with the hit single I Kissed a Girl. Yes, you heard that right. It was about 10 years before Katy Perry's song of the same title. When not writing for the studio, Robin has created musicals that have seen the stage here in the US and as far off as Russia. And in 2005, Robin and I co-produced the Spinto Band's Nice and Nicely Done, and then later K.S. Rhodes' Dead Language. Some of his other credits include Butterfly Boucher, Tim Easton, Tommy Womack, Lion Limb, Swan Dive, and Mary-Kate O'Neill, to name a few. But more importantly, Robin is my mentor. He took me in and showed me how to make records at Alex the Great when I was first starting this whole recording journey. And he's been a creative inspiration and a friend to me for 20 years. He even officiated at my wedding. Please welcome the man who can still kick my ass in ping pong any day of the week, Robin Eaton, to Recording Studio Rockstars. Robin, are you ready to rock, dude?
I'm ready to rock. Oh, Lidge, it's so good to be standing across from you in your beautiful Toy Box studio here. Just to give everybody, I don't know if people have talked about this place, but it's just a wonderful room that was built. I can't believe this was this a garage back here? It's like it is a toy box with this MCI, this board that's like a vintage piece that came out of a Criterion. Is that right?
Yeah, so it came from Criteria Studio C in Miami, where it was all through the 70s, doing more records than, I don't know, maybe I've done that many records now, but it did a lot of records in its 11-year span there.
I mean, everybody claims certain records with these boards.
Yeah. Well, so, does this feel a little bit like Alex the Great to you at times? I took a lot of inspiration from you guys when I put my studio together.
Yeah, I mean, well, Lidge, you really helped us put Alex the Great together. I mean, Lidge came in and we still had guitar leads going. Remember hooking the preamps up, and you went, Rob, you don't want to have guitar lines going to your outboard gear. And so Lidge, he wired and got us sort of up to snuff over there. You did, and you wired the patch bay. It's been a real journey with Lidge. I mean, I could just spend an hour just talking about the stuff we've done together.
Well, do you remember that day that, so Brad had gone off to tour with Matthew Sweet or something like that. I think he was off on tour, and we had this window of opportunity, and I'd been trying to convince you that we should, upgrade the studio. Here I was the young guy, and it was like, hey man, we should do this, we should do that, we should do this. And pretty much it was like, hey, I think I'm pretty cool. I know how to wire some stuff, so you should let me wire things, But you gave me the green light one week while Brad was out on the road, and I just tore that place apart, man. I took the entire wiring out of the back of the console and the patch bay and just had wires in all directions. And I remember you walking into the control room and seeing the state that things were in.
That's the thing about Nashville and about what's great about being in the studio and having a space that you doing a creative thing in. It's a place where you can bring other people in and they can do their thing as well. And I think it's really always good to allow people to do whatever they want to do. And if they want to, come in and paint a wall or design a mic pre, have at it.
Well, that was one of the attitudes that you guys had at Alex the Great that I really loved. It was just, it felt homey, it felt creative. You walk in and you're surrounded by things that inspire you to make music, at least for me. I mean, there are other people I think that prefer a studio where you walk in and it looks like a bank lobby with a black leather couch in it, but that was never really my style, In fact, I used to always describe sorry to anybody who's listening, rock stars, if you do have a black leather couch, I'm sure your black leather couch is awesome. But for me, at that time growing up, I remember I sort of, separated in my mind. There's black leather couch studios, and then there's like cool studios with just creative stuff all around. Another thing was the smell of the studio. You would walk in and there's a kind of an earthy old mold. Maybe, but it was like, it's like
still
the old
there,
tape
whatever
machine
that is,
and stuff like that.
Whatever that is.
The wood.
But you walk into Alex the Great and there's a pump organ. You walk right into a pump organ and there's these kind of weird artwork on the walls and funky gold velvet sofa that's falling apart. But then there's all these vintage guitars, Gibsons and Fenders and K's and Silvertones and amplifiers and a Keith Haring that I remember from New York snorting cocaine off it with John Cale after I'd ripped it off of the subway. There was, sorry, is that okay to say?
That's perfectly fine, yeah. I intentionally rated the podcast explicit so we wouldn't have to edit ourselves.
Well, fuck yeah. The thing about studios, I remember my impetus for going into the studio. I mean, I went when I was a kid, just starting out, and I had been, sitting in my room writing songs on the ukulele, and then got into bands in the mid-'60s, and then kind of started wanting my songs that I was writing to, I wanted to go into the studio. And there was a Doug Fern who had veritable studios up in, is it Ardmore? Somewhere near Philadelphia.
Is that the same Fern?
Fern preamps.
The compressors and preamps and all that?
And he was a guy who he had a beard, much like your beard. It came down to his stomach. I remember going in with some of my hometown heroes and recording 3 songs, and there was just one big compressor at the back. And Doug, if you hear this, I wonder, that was probably the start of his business, So here was a guy who, he had a studio, and I don't know how long that studio, Veritable it was called, how long it lasted. But, and also for a session, we paid, 3-hour block was $400, I think, including tape. Now, that's pretty much what, our studios are going for now, a whole day, right? For a whole day now, so, and that was in the, the mid-'70s. So it was just so exciting to be in the studio and all of a sudden to hear back this beautiful sound that, you created. And that kind of started me thinking, I mean, I never at that point was thinking I would ever understand what went on behind the glass. And then when I was in Paris and was signed to Warner Brothers, and we mixed the record at Trident in London, and that was like going into a fucking spaceship.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit more about that. What did Trident smell like when you walked in there?
Well, it was just like walking in there. First of all, I made the record in France, and I had to carry all these 2-inch tapes over to England, and I got strip searched when I went through customs. I mean, completely buck naked strip search. I mean, I had somewhat long hair, but right. I wasn't really I didn't look like a drug dealer.
Come on, you had those striped Rolling Stones pants on, didn't you?
Yeah,
and
something.
Long hair.
I don't know, but I just
remember.
remember
like a dangling tassels, leather jacket, and the whole deal.
I mean, I was pretty excited and also terrified to go into Trident Studios, I mean, it wasn't Abbey Road, but I knew that The Long and Winding Road had been recorded there. And Genesis was recording while I was there. The whole time I was mixing, well, they were mixing my record. I was wandering around the studio and Genesis was downstairs and they were working on one vocal part for the whole time. That kind of, I kept thinking, boy, these guys are really putting a lot of time into this, after 3 days on the same part. But it was an amazing place. It just had all these lights, crazy lights. And
so they probably had the Trident A-range consoles in every room and all that kind of stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And so what was it like?
I mean, they also had the room that Genesis was in, which was down below the room I was working in. It was sort of like Abbey Road, where there was they were up high, and then you'd go downstairs into a room that had the piano, and they said, "Oh, go play that. Paul McCartney played that."
Yeah.
You go down and play.
The classic elevated control room overlooking the live room, and because people didn't go into the control room, right? It was just the engineer and the producer and the band and the artists, and all those people stayed out in the big space usually.
But anyway, having someone believe in me enough to invest the money to have me go to Trident, I mean, I didn't really ever appreciate that. I mean, my producer, the guy who invested that money, he was a drug addict. It didn't really matter because it afforded me like this joy of like getting to go out and actually hang out with these engineers and listen to them and watch them be wire jockeys. And I really enjoyed that. And it's sort of
you guys were mixing off 8-track tape at that point?
No, it was 24 track.
24 tracks,
yeah.
Okay. And this was the
77, maybe 77. I think 77, beginning of 78.
Cool.
Somewhere in that era.
All right. Well, so let's come forward a little bit. So then, at some point you decided to move down to Nashville. You came to New York too, and you had a deal there.
Yeah. Well,
after France, right?
Yeah, I had Michael Zilka was signing everything below, 14th Street at one point, early 80s. And I came back to work with a band called the Leisure Units from France. I just deserted my producer over there. He said, "Rob, I don't know if I'm a boy or a girl." And I was like, okay, I'm getting out of here. I'm going back to New York. And my friends from Wesleyan University, Ali Suho and Mike McClintock, had started this band called the Leisure Units, and I liked their stuff. So I was like, I'm going to go back there and hang out with these guys, which I did.
Go hang out with your friends.
Yeah. And so I hung out with them, and we played CBGBs and, all the clubs in New York City, and got picked up by Michael Lang, who did Woodstock, and then I got fired.
From the band?
Yeah, because Michael Lang wanted Joe Cocker's bass player to play the parts, And then the band fell apart, and Mike McClintock was going up to see one day after that band had fallen apart. He was going up to see if you could get a deal with Zilka at Z Records. And he said, "Rob, do you have a tape or anything?" And I had been making tapes on my Porta studio at my parents' house, which
was in Wilmington.
In Wilmington, Delaware,
right?
Yeah. And I was, using my Porta studio, a little Casio, acoustic guitar, maybe a Mustang, and a little amplifier.
But this wouldn't be the cassette kind of Porta studio.
Yes.
Oh, it was? Okay,
great.
It
was the cassette.
Okay, great.
So I gave a cassette to my friend Michael, and he went up to Michael Zilka to get his record deal, and he came back. I said, "Did you get a record deal?" He said, "No, you did," which was really kind of just par for the course. It seemed like life was just, always opening up, unfolding at that point. And so through that deal, I got to record at Cajun, started at Cajun with Mike McClintock, who had gotten me the deal. He wanted to produce, which was, since he was a complete, crazy man, that was crazy. He was the producer. David Lichtenstein, Roy Lichtenstein's son.
The artist, right?
Was the engineer. And Cajun was the old Winchester or Remington rifle factory outside of Philadelphia. And we spent, $100,000 there. And then we weren't happy with it. I fired Michael as producer. And then Michael Zilka said, "Well, let's do it here." And so tried some studios there, RPM, I think. And then eventually went to Electric Lady to finish the record. And I had this crazy girl who I'd met in the interim who had sort of taken over the deal. And, it was just amazing. And then Electric Lady, to be an Electric Lady and to, there's the mural,
right.
And there's the A room and looking through all the mics, and I ended up with an SM7 for my voice, which is kind of reedy and sort of, I don't know, nondescript.
Yeah. You said you tried all the mics and that was your first experience deciding the SM7 was the way to go.
I tried all these, multi-$1,000 mics, and which it was a good lesson because, sometimes the SM7 is the best mic.
Right. But at that point, was anybody giving you that insight? Was anybody saying,
no.
Hey, the SM7 works great and everything, or you just stumbled on it?
No, I stumbled on it.
That's cool.
Working there was, it was interesting because the subway would rumble underneath. The A train goes right under Electric Lady. And I was like, how much money are we paying for this studio? I mean, here it just wouldn't fly. It's like, well, I mean, you do have a train back there.
I do. Yeah. But it never seems to bother the sessions.
Yeah, I know. And we have the fairground over where we are.
Right.
And we also have the train. Anyway, so it was really interesting to be in New York in Electric Lady with a girl that I really was fascinated by, who had never sung at all. And I remember her thinking that I'd taken too long to sing a vocal, and she came out and, kicked me in the where. And I had to chase her, and I chased her around the block. And my poor producer was like, "Oh, Robin, please don't come over with short sleeves on. I just don't want to see the scratches on your arms." But anyway, I shouldn't get into this stuff. But it was like, it was really very, very exciting, to be in New York and making a record for Z. And then we went up to the Drake Hotel, Chris Blackwell's apartment there, and he wanted to meet us. He was going to sign the record.
Chris Blackwell is Island Records.
Yeah, he was Island Records guy. And this crazy drug addict I was making the record with, she went up to the wall and she saw the U2 on the wall and she said, U2, I hate that band, which was not a good thing. But anyway, finished up there in New York. That record ended up getting shelved, but it was amazing to make. Right after that, I met my wife at a party. She said, "Why don't you try Nashville?" Boom. I was down in Nashville. That was, 88 maybe.
Yeah. So Nashville was a different scene then than it is today, but it was already beginning to change. Country music was just getting recognized for the number of record sales that it was generating, I guess because of SoundScan around that time, I think, right?
Yeah. But I mean, country music had already was booming. I mean, a lot had been going on, but what was happening in Nashville that was interesting to me was that there were, there was the Questionnaires, and there was Jason and the Scorchers, and people like that were here.
So the scene was just starting to change. Rock and roll was beginning to make an appearance in Nashville.
Well, it was making a big appearance. I worked as a landscaper, and then I would play music at night up in my attic on 18th Avenue South. And there was a sounded kind of weird country band or something next door. And one day I heard this little knock on the door, and I went down, and there was this guy, Brad Talbot, was standing there with his long hair, and he's like, "Can I play in your band?" And we started a band, left, right, left. And that kind of got me out of the mulch truck and back up on the stage again. And through that is how I met Brad Jones. And we went up to North Carolina, where my grandparents had a log cabin. And we made the King Bub record there, where we didn't have a compressor. We just had a mic pre and a tape machine. And since we didn't have a compressor, the drums we couldn't really use the drums. So Brad decided he would program all the drums on one of those Elise's drum machines. So the drums on that record, needless to say, don't sound that great, but it was just a wonderful creative experience of, breaking glass out on the mountainside, just sound effects and craziness and having fun and waking up every day and going into the barn and creating music. And that barn also, I recently did a record with Lion Limb, it was Stuart Bruneau, a record I really like called Rot. We dragged all good recording gear by this point, compressors and limiters and nice mic pre's and microphones, and made a little record out in that same barn. So that's a continuity. Yeah,
what's the difference between having all the gear in that same barn years later and not having all the gear in that same barn years earlier? Not
really. I mean, I Sometimes I think that the King Bub record would have been better if we'd had at least one compressor.
Okay, there you go, rock stars. Yeah, a little bit of gear envy is just fine. As long as you're making great music, in the studio. So, Robin, I like to ask our guests to share with us an inspirational quote as we kick off here in the interview. You got anything that would get us psyched up about making records?
Well, I remember making my folky record in France, and I was working with this bass player who was Keith Jarrett's bass player. I can't remember the guy's name, but I remember I got through a take and I stopped. I said, oh man, that take was okay, but there were mistakes in it. And this old jazz guy looked at me and he goes, man, the music is the mistake. And that has always really stuck with me.
That's cool, man. So the idea behind that is that it's in the mistakes and the human errors that we make that the real interesting stuff lies, that is the music. That's why we want to listen to it.
Yeah, I mean, the anomaly, the thing that only happens once. It's not, nowadays we often just cut and paste, What if some magic would have happened if you had actually sung that second chorus, or some other thing might have happened. Everything has its place, but I still like music that gets played sequentially and at the same time. And I think a lot of the producers and engineers and musicians in town are now, particularly here in Nashville, I think, we're tracking again. It's like you get the whole band and you get the artist and you find a way of having everybody play at once and sing the song. Often it's the best vocal take they'll ever get.
I love doing that stuff, if for no other reason than it's just a lot of fun to be creative as you can be with a group of people together at the same time. It's just really satisfying to me. I always feel great when I've created something really great with a group of people.
Yeah, and you're really good. You have such a great vibe. You're always up. You're always positive.
I fooled you, man. Thanks.
No, I know. I mean, we all have our challenges, but I think that over the years, this whole process, starting a studio, building the studio was so much fun, with Brad. I mean, I remember coming back from the mountains and Brad said, hey, Rob, that was so much fun making that record up there in the mountains. Why don't we look for a place to have a studio? And my wife's business was in this big warehouse, and attached to that was Elvis Presley's cousin or something. And I saw these Cadillacs would drive in and out and around, and he would wash them in the garage and then drive them into this courtyard behind this little side building next to my wife's warehouse. And that was like, that place looked so cool. The landlord of those buildings, this guy, Cato Bass. Do you remember Cato Bass?
Yeah, I remember.
Driving around on a tractor out there. Yeah. Anyway, he was a fighter pilot in the Korean War, and he was just a character. And he said, Rob, why don't you buy these buildings? And so we ended up buying the buildings for like nothing. We ended up having the option of putting a studio in the little building. And so that's where Alex the Great went.
Yeah.
And now that's where Club Roar, my wife's business, got bigger and moved out of the big studio. And so now that's where Club Roar is. And I'm just in the process of taking on some new partners.
Yeah, you guys have built a beautiful place over there. I mean, you just did a whole lot of investing in the studio, putting in these ISO booths and designing all that. You want to talk a little bit about what went into designing the new build for the studio?
When I had been in Club Roar with my little setup for a number of years, and I'd always thought about, going whole hog and investing in either a controller.
And just for you rock stars, to describe Club Roar is basically one big open warehouse
It's about,
space.
6,000 square foot warehouse.
Yeah, and so control room, recording, everything was happening just in the same space, even though you did have some little offices.
I had little ISO rooms that were offices, but they were really not soundproofed or sound treated. So anyway, Patrick Dampier came by one day and said, hey, I have this board, this Trident 80B. Can I park it over here? Why don't we look at that? And so he brought that over, and, 4 years later, we have two Colin Dupuis designed ISO rooms, lots of glass so people can all see each other. The mix station is out in the big room, sort of like what's his name, Daniel Lanois would do.
Right.
Actually, his engineer was just over there and went, "Oh, this is great. This is what Daniel would like, you know."
Well, maybe Daniel will be coming there soon. Who knows? That's a shout out to you, Daniel, if you listen to this.
Come to Club Aurora. But so anyway, it's a really cool room, and lots of interesting people are coming through. And
what are some of the challenges and benefits of having a control room sort of out in the big space instead of a typical small or medium designed isolated control room?
The way it's been set up, it's still, I'd say we're 90% there. I built these gobos with floating clouds, and that was really the way I found to work in there, because it's a very reverberant space. So of course you have to figure all that out. And that's something that's ongoing. And that's something that Colin Dupuis is really good at knowing about. So we're kind of in the process of doing the ultimate tweaks over there.
So with no treatment in the middle of the room, it would be quite reverberant for a control room space. But you found that if you could just bring in some well-placed gobos and drop a cloud down from the ceiling above that area, you can sort of tighten up the area right where you are.
Very much so. You know, there's a great lounge area behind the mix area, and you can put gobos in between, and there's pianos and organs, and they're all hooked in through a board that is accessed on the patch bay.
I loved hearing all your stories about getting here and coming to Nashville and starting out in music and everything. And I've got a lot of questions. I want to dig into some of the fun recording stuff with you. But before we go, you had a really funny story you once told me about you and Allie in New York going up to a loft somewhere to audition for a new band that had taken out an ad in the paper. Do you remember that story? And can you share that one with us?
No, that's sort of urban legend, but yeah, you mean the story about going up to the KISS office, you know? Yeah, but that's not a story I really want to get into.
All right.
And it wasn't Allie, it was Michael.
Oh, it was Michael.
These guys are both dead too.
Yeah.
Although Mike McClintock did just release a record posthumously.
Wow.
Called Sex. So look up Mike McClintock Sex.
Okay,
online.
Cool. All right, Rob. Well, let's get into the tech stuff here. Let's geek out a little bit on recording. How do you go about writing or co-writing a great song? What can you share with people? What can you tell our listeners, who I lovingly refer to as the rock stars, about writing a great song?
Well, I would say writing a great song, or even writing any song at all, you just have to be willing to write some stuff down and put it out there. You know, you have to be free. You know, you have to be free to let your idea see the light of day.
Let's start with just writing solo and then come to writing with someone, because I imagine
I used to sit in my room and I would write, 8 songs a year in the old days, where I would sit there and I'd get my guitar and go, and eventually I would come up with something that I could play in public. So it was like working really hard in private to play something in public. And that had nothing to do with anybody else but me.
Yeah.
And I've always thought of myself as being a poet more than anything else. So I would string words together, and then I'd go out. And the whole idea in the beginning was, have something that you can sing, and then afterwards have girls follow you around and follow you home, But, coming to Nashville, the whole thing about the songcraft and all that, going out on songwriting sessions, I've never been very good at that. I've always found people that I can write with. Like, I have a really long relationship with Jill Sobule, and we've written a ton of songs. We're still writing songs, and we sit around and we go, "Hey, what do you think about this or that?" And we just start talking and playing guitars, and something pops out. I don't think songwriting is something that you can really teach someone. I think it's something that you evolve into through just feeling something come out of you and out of the collective unconscious. And, I think a lot of it does come from what I would call the collective unconscious. We all have access to the same things up there. It's just some people can pull it out and put it in a song. And if they happen to be signed to a record label, they get it out there, and it becomes sort of they speak for the whole generation. That's what Bob Dylan and Joni Mitchell and John Lennon and all those guys did, Jimi Hendrix. They just were able somehow through their, I don't know whether they were in a trance or whether they were stone cold sober or high or what they were. But they created this great music from allowing it to be free and come out.
Let's talk a little bit about your methods, just habits. So, for example, would you spend
I keep
certain
notebooks.
time writing in a notebook without a guitar in your hand?
Oh yeah,
and
then
then when you have a guitar, do you, for example, pick up your notebook and go look at some of the poems?
Well, you know
and see
that I
if they
did.
fit? But our listeners don't.
I mean, I'll have I keep a notebook, and I've always kept a notebook. And it's good to keep notebooks, whether it's for tech notes and to figure out what's been happening in the studio and what's happened that you like. But also, it's great to draw little pictures and have word pictures that later on you can put in songs. And I think it's like the songwriter has his box of tools that songwriting, it's like a continuity. You carry it with you. So if you start young, and you might have a lyric or something that doesn't fit and you can't make it into a song, but you carry it with you. It's part of your songwriter baggage that you carry along. And all of a sudden you'll be writing a song and that phrase will pop out. And all of a sudden you'll find a home for it.
That's something that I've noticed about our friend Chris King, who sang and still sings in my band out of St. Louis, Eleanor Roosevelt, originally Enormous Richard. And then sometimes Three Fried Men, some of the many names. But, I remember way back in college when he was first getting into writing, he told me that he had heard or been advised, if you want to be a writer, you got to carry a journal with you all the time. And I've seen him do that ever since then, all the way to today. There's just always a notebook around. There's always a journal.
Yeah.
If we were on the road with our band, it was called the Gig Book, Gigus Bookus.
Yeah. Gigus Bookus.
Gigus Bookus, yeah.
Well, I have so many of them, and I feel sorry for my daughter who's going to have to pour through these things, because they go back as far as 1965 and even earlier than that, actually. And, she's going to have to wade through all this stuff, and I don't know, maybe she'll just put it in a box and burn it. But
who knows?
Who knows? But it's that continuity of a life, and you carry it along, and it served me well.
Have you ever found that some of the new technologies, your iPhone, your laptop, that the digital stuff can augment it or replace it or anything like that?
I mean, it's really great, just looking at my phone here, I can go to Evernote and, the voice memos, it's just such an easy and great way of capturing things, If you're writing with somebody and say, oh, wait, let's capture that so we don't lose it, and you just capture it. And that's
when you have it in a written notebook, there must be an experience that it comes across your radar again. You glance across it. Do you find that if it's in your phone, you still get to glance across it, or is it a little rarer to stumble across it again if it's digital?
I'll go through my phone and look for stuff, but it's really, I really like the analog feeling of. I use moleskins. I go ahead and pay $20 for a notebook and use a moleskin. And then,
it's got to last 40 years, right?
Yeah, it's got to last 40 years, and they're all up there, and it's great.
Well, so Rob, let's jump into some recording bits. One of the things that I really appreciated about you, and maybe it took me a moment to see it too, when I first met you, I think that there was a sense that you were more focused on the writing and the producing, and you were learning the recording stuff on a certain level. And then as you learned it, then I would get back together with you and you'd play me these things that you did. And somehow you've always had this ability to sort of throw out the rules about recording stuff, break them all, and create stuff that sounds really freaking cool, So what can you tell us about things that you've learned about getting a great drum sound, for example? How do you get really cool drums? What are some favorite things you like to do?
Well, the thing that's always a challenge with drums is phase, and so I was always, of the 2 or 3 mic drum kit sound, it's just easier. Really, it's more always the part you play, making sure the drum kit is tuned in a way that you like it to sound, and have the drums be, fairly tight, and then have one that's a bit away from the kit so that captures the ambience of the room. I'm not really much either for manipulating after the fact in Pro Tools, changing the phase relationships and everything. But, you can do that if you want. So it makes it a little bit easier.
Do you mostly like to capture a drum sound as you imagine it's going to end up in the mix?
Yeah. And I've been listening to like these Coltrane records mono. Roger Mutino gave me a whole box set of to listen to that. And
Roger Mutino, another fantastic producer.
Yeah, he's a great producer. Old friend from New York back in the day.
I met him when I met you.
Oh, right.
Because you guys were mixing Jill Sobule while I was interning at Woodland Studios.
At Woodland Studios, right. Yeah. I mean, Roger, we go back. I remember riding on his motorcycle and, hey, Rob, let's go uptown and write a song, driving between cabs and stuff. It was terrifying. But anyway, what were we talking about?
So drum sounds,
back to drum
sounds. Just talking about getting cool sounds in the studio.
Yeah, I mean, if you use a cool guitar and a simple mic, interesting amp, you can't really go wrong. I tend to work with people who want to do extreme stuff, like Lion Limb Stewart. He really wanted to blow things out all the time.
Right. You found yourself being the tech engineer on those sessions, trying to tell him that he was doing it wrong, right?
Yeah, but I did. But he was like, no, Rob, put it in the red. And I'm like, but that's digital distortion. And he'd go, that's what I want, So, you have a responsibility to the music as well as to the artist. So you have to kind of do the best you can with these characters. But Stewart is just so brilliant at what he does. And he understands that what he's going for is something that hasn't ever been done before. And that's what I'm going for too. Nobody ever heard Hendrix before Hendrix, or the Beatles or the Kinks or whoever, It seems like now we have a kind of more of a homogenous music palette because we're all recording on the same everybody's recording in Logic or Pro Tools. And that's why everybody yearns for the analog, and we want something that differentiates us and our sound from the rest of the herd, who are all using the same plugins, the same settings, the same, the John Lennon sound, all the Mellotron stuff, all the stuff that we loved on those records that were seminal records to us. We want to put those on our records, but I think really what we need to do is find ways of coming up with our own tools and creating our own instruments. And whether we have to design circuitry that is a little odd and out there and go through new stuff. And the best engineers are people who know about circuitry and know how to change circuitry in a way that will give them something that is new. I mean, Lee Scratch Perry, wonderful, guy. He's one of my all-time great heroes because he would go, oh man, I mean, it was just freaking believable what he came up with.
Yeah, I love dub. I love all that stuff. For me, that's a big influence when I am mixing at Bonnaroo at the Hay Bale studio every year.
Yeah.
I sort of fancy myself as a DJ more than an engineer, mixer, or producer or anything like that. I just like doing everything in real time, live. I want to grab knobs and turn things and, make those mistakes that you talk about. You want to...
Yeah, I thought you should have little delays and reverb things that you can go through on your Rockstar performances where you can step on an effects pedal and it'll go woo, 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 woo.
While I'm talking on the mic?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good idea.
I mean, why not have something that, where you can say, well, okay, let's look at a delay, and
here, I'll talk into this water cup. Echo. How's that?
It's really, really good, Lidge. Whoa.
Or if it was my daughter, she would say, Daddy, can you tell if I'm drinking this now or not? Sorry, rock stars. We'll get serious here again. Rob, tell us some ways that you've really enjoyed miking up a piano. For me, a piano is an interesting instrument that can be challenging sometimes to figure out. You look at this and you're like, what the hell am I supposed to do with this? How am I supposed to mic this thing to make it sound cool?
Yeah.
And you have that beautiful chickering, I know, over at your studio.
And the Steinway at Alex.
Do you use 7 mics on the piano, for example?
No, I mean, typically now we'll use 1 mic, but it's, right in getting it into the guts of the piano and using a really good FET 47 or something like that works great. I remember using Sennheiser's on the Cass Rhodes. He always liked it mic'd underneath the piano.
Right.
So that you didn't hear the direct boing of the strings. You just heard the resonance of
the soundboard. Right?
Soundboard,
projecting
right.
down.
And sometimes you can use both of those. But then once again, you get the phase issues, but that's easily dealt with. People
How do you easily deal with the phase issues?
Well, you just move the mics either farther apart or closer in.
Okay.
And either to the front or to the back of the instrument. Sometimes it's nice to mic a piano from the back and one right down in sort of in the center of the strings that gets the whole full spectrum of, high and low frequencies.
Do you like to
do a stereo,
Yeah.
stereo bass treble strings. So there's just any number of ways of doing it.
How often do you mic up a piano with an SM57, for example?
That happens.
It happens. Not often, though.
Not often. It's usually either small diaphragm condensers or a nice, sweet, large diaphragm condenser.
Yeah. One of the challenges I find with piano is, it's just such a big instrument. It's
how do you mic
do you
your
want
piano?
Everything from the lowest low to the highest high to fit into your mix? I think if you're trying to add, a focused, narrow piano melody part or overdub into a busy pop track, then you might want something that's you just want to get those few notes. The other thing that took me a long time to figure out was that we were just playing in the wrong octave.
Yeah.
We just needed to move up an octave. Our voicings were wrong. It had nothing to do with the mics.
Yeah. Well, that's true. And I think, a good piano player is really the key to a great piano sound. Because if you get a great piano player there, you can usually know what's going on because you can just move the mic and the piano will blossom moving it from a place to another place.
Yeah. And then the other thing is, the other trick
Trust
is
your
to
ears.
Have the pianist sit on their left hand.
Yeah,
if you've got a bass in the band and they're just crowding, the low end by playing big octave left hand stuff that's not necessary. That was another lesson I remember learning at Alex the Great, no less, from you and from Brad.
Yeah. Well, pianos are difficult, miking guitars and whether you use ribbons or dynamics or whatever you want to use on guitar amps, it's a lot of choice. And I remember I remember with the Spinto band, we had every amp set up across the room. And then we had 3 or 4 different mics. And we would just, as the session evolved, we would just move different mics in front of the same or different amplifiers until we got a sound that we liked. And then do it again. We'd do one take with that. And then we'd do 3 or 4 takes on other amps, and then you'd weed through all of those.
That was my period where I wanted to do everything. Well, it was fun to do, though. It was fun. It was way over the top.
Yeah, we had no idea that we were going to make any money on that project, and then in the end, it was sort of at the end of the big advance days, but we got a big advance for that.
Yeah, we did,
which was nice.
Probably just about paid all of us for the time that we actually put into it.
Well, yeah, and it actually bought the gear that I have it at Club Roar and some of the stuff at Alex the Great.
Well, it certainly helped me get this place started too.
Yeah.
So Rob, now how about here's a question that I think we are all asking all the time. We're working on our recordings, we're getting our mix, and we're trying to get to that final stage. And one big challenge I was just experiencing it this morning is getting the low end right. You're trying to have this finished thing, and if the low end is wrong, it really screws with your perception of it being a good mix or a bad mix. And I know you and I have tried all kinds of things. We used to run wires out to the car and have a cassette go into the car stereo while we were mixing, But what are some of the things now that you rely on?
The low end, the guys that have the really good low end have the speakers that have the good low end and that have the nice rounded bottom. It's really hard when you're monitoring without a good low-end reference to get good low-end. So that really speaks to going to a studio that has a really good low-end on the speakers or, subs, which we were talking about getting at Club Roar. And Alex the Great, somehow we've always managed to get a good low-end by just, we know the room and we go to the car a lot and play it on, you drive around and you listen to it. But, that kind of the modern low end that everybody's used to hearing and cranking up in in their hot rods, you know. I mean, I think you really have to have the stuff that those guys, those hip hop guys and those pop producers are going for. I mean, don't you think so, Lidge? I mean,
I'm always trying, just like everybody else. I'm working my ass off trying to make sure that the low end is right in a mix. And if I can't hear it right in the sweet spot while I'm mixing, then I find I have to give myself more time to take it into a new environment, listen to it there, get those new initial notes. Like this morning, I dropped my daughter off at school at 8 o'clock, and I was driving back to the studio, and I popped on my mixes that I had just remixed and remastered yesterday. And sure enough, I'm hearing stuff in the low end. And I just, you know, with that clarity of the morning ear, I was able to sort of identify a few things. And then later today, I think I'll pull it back up. I'll see if I can do those tweaks. The challenge is when I do the tweaks, I'm not convinced that I'll be able to hear it in the control room while I'm doing it. Sometimes there's a little bit of a disconnect between what you get in the control room and what you experience when you're in the car or in that other place.
Yeah.
And I've had Carl Tatz on the show, you know, and he talks about the importance, like you say, of having the right kind of monitoring to really hear it while you do it.
Right.
And me personally, I haven't had enough experience on those kind of monitors to know that would be the ultimate solution yet. But I agree with you. I mean, look to anybody who's consistently nailing the low end and ask them too. And you're right, they probably have the right kind of stuff, or they know their speakers. But I mean, you know, you and I have done it in situations where you have to go to the car, you have to listen in different places. And that's common from, I'd say most of the rock stars listening are dealing with that. So what kind of tips do you have for taking notes on mixes and going and remixing and getting it right and, you know, going back to
vocal level
the studio?
Is always an issue, you know, and some people, I mean, I always like the vocal to be audible. Lots of artists want their vocal to be back, and I think it's important for producers to make sure that the vocal is out front. Sometimes we don't achieve that because people can be very persistent about wanting their vocal buried. But
well, let me ask you this: why should the vocal be out front? Why do we have the responsibility as a producer?
Well, I mean, and by out front, I don't mean that it should be so loud that it's annoying, but just that it can be. I think the vocal is usually in most kinds of music, the vocal's important, the most important thing. Maybe not in certain kinds of music, but in most kinds of music it is. And it's also the responsibility of the producer and the mix engineer to make sure that all these frequencies are kind of feeding, dovetailing, so that it's a full sound without having one frequency annoyingly popping out and bugging your ear.
Right.
You know, and even if it is the tambourine that is really loud, there's still, you got to tie down that 2K or whatever it is, or 6K, that's like, you know, that's annoying, you know. And if you want the tambourine loud, it doesn't have to be the annoying frequency that's loud.
There's something that comes to mind now as we're discussing this that I've never really realized before, but it makes perfect sense. Because we talked about the Lee Scratch Perry, you know, the approach to doing things in the moment, live moves. We talked about the music is the mistake, the power of making mistakes as creative expressions. And then we're also now talking about that moment of trying to tweak and finalize the you know, this painting before we hang it on the wall of the Louvre. And really, it's like, it sounds like at the initial point of making those mistakes, that's when you create the grand creative expressions. And then later, when you're doing these remixes and you're taking notes and you're trying to get the low end right, that's at the point of just simply trying to identify things that are annoying and remove the things that suck a little bit, you know?
Yeah.
Would you agree that that's kind of the way the creative process works?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's so subjective what we do. And some people's subjectivity is much more commercial than other people's. Some people really do know how to make a record that will go out there and be able to compete in the marketplace. And they know how to make it pop. I think those are the successful people, you know. And, you know, sometimes you have to defer to the expertise of those guys, you know. Let somebody else mix your record if there's a budget to do that, you know.
Right.
But I think almost any of these rock stars out there could be those guys. And you have to trust your own instincts implicitly. And the sooner you trust your own instincts and you don't trust some, recording rock star's instinct, you got to trust your own instinct. And the sooner you do that, the further along you'll be to getting good stuff, of your own.
All right. Well, so, hey, rock stars, we're going to take a break now and we'll come back in for the jam session. Before we do, I want to remind you that you can find the show notes to this on your mobile device podcast player. You can see the show notes right there with the episode, whether you're on iPhone or Android. And there should be a clickable link there, which will take you right to the website if you want to get more of the show notes. You can also go to recordingstudiorockstars.com or rsrockstars.com and search for Robin Eaton. And that'll take you right to the show notes so you can get more deeper info. We might include links to music and records that Robin has produced, songs that he's written, cool stuff like that. We'll see you guys in just a moment for the jam session.
Bye-bye.
Hey everybody, it's Lid Shaw, and I want to thank you so much for listening to this episode of Recording Studio Rockstars. I really appreciate you, and I really appreciate your time. And as a way of saying thank you, I've created a special mix tutorial just for you, Rockstars, totally free, called the Mix Master Bundle. With it, you get over 2 hours of detailed videos watching over my shoulder as I mix a song in my studio. Plus, I give you the free ebook that explains how I recorded the tracks, and you get downloadable multi-tracks so that you can practice your mixes, including the Pro Tools session file, using nothing but stock plugins in Pro Tools, all of which you would find in any other DAW, whether you're on Logic or Studio One or Reaper. Maybe you're struggling with trying to improve your mix technique, or maybe you just simply don't have access to multi-track files or can't record a full drum set in your studio. I wanted to give you a chance to create your own mixes from full drum kit, bass, and guitars recorded in my studio. The song is called American Winter, and it's off my instrumental record Skadoosh, and it's all available for you totally free right now. All you need to do to get it is text Mix Master Bundle to 33444, and I'll send it directly to your email. Again, that's Mix Master Bundle with no space to 33444, or you can go directly to mixmasterbundle.com, enter your email, and I'll send all the files directly to you. Thanks so much, rock stars. We'll see you guys in the jam session. Cheers. Hey, rock stars, we're back with my guest, Robin Eaton, on Recording Studio Rockstars. We're about to jump into the jam session. Robin, my old and awesome friend. I don't mean old as an age. I mean like we've been friends for a long time. Are you ready to jam?
Sure, man. Lay it on me.
Sweet. When you got started out in recording, what was one of the big obstacles that was holding you back?
Money.
Money. All right, so money. What'd you do?
Money. Well, I just bought cheap gear and looked for cheap guitars, and you can find enough to make a record. Nowadays, you can make a record for $150,
So when you guys launched Alex the Great, the studio, I remember Bob Solomon, who owned Woodland Studios, when I asked him about you guys, because frankly, other than Daniel Lanois coming into the studio, you guys were the only other record that got me excited about being there as an intern and seeing this new music come along.
Thank you.
So he told me, I asked him about you guys, and he was like, oh yeah, those guys have an ADAT studio in town or something. Can you tell us
ADATs.
What is an ADAT?
Well, an ADAT is like VHS format that people were using back in the 90s. I mean, it afforded us to get into the recording business. I had one, Brad had one. We had a couple of compressors and a couple of microphones, and we set up and started making records.
Right. So you picked technology that was good enough, and you figured out how to make great records.
Just figured out how to make it good. We'd been talking about the Porta Studio, and I had a 388 at one point, a Tascam 388, which was an 8-track reel-to-reel kind of flat thing. It was an amazing piece of gear, and still is. You can find these things online really inexpensively. The tape is the expensive part.
Yeah.
yeah, I would advise everybody. And as far as mic techniques and all that, I found that, most of the people that are starting out, you guys all know this already, that you can just go to YouTube and you can see 400 different ways to mic a snare,
Yeah. And then we'll see you next week when it's time to mic the snare.
Yeah, we'll see you next week.
Or you could just grab a mic and stick it on a snare, go listen to it and see what it sounds like too, right? No, but I think it's really cool to have the YouTube resource. I have to admit that for me personally, I'm kind of addicted to learning now. At this stage of my life, if I give in to my addiction, it would be to turn on a YouTube video and see if I can learn something new about something else. It's a little much for me even sometimes. I have to remind myself to just take a break and, eat lunch without, having screen in front of me. But I think it's an amazing resource. There's so much to learn out there. It's like music. In the rest of our lives, we couldn't even listen to all the music that's out there or learn all the stuff that's out there to learn. We got to be selective.
Yeah. Well, selective and, just find the thing that resonates for you, and hunt it down and listen to it over and over.
Yeah. All right. Well, so now you've already shared a great quote in the beginning of this, but also tell us some of the best advice you received when you were starting out. And that great quote, of course, was the music is the mistake, or the mistake is the music. Which way was it?
The music, man. The music is the mistake.
Nice.
Well, I think the advice is, it's all cliche, trust your own instincts. The sooner that you do it yourself, one gig on stage is like, a year in your room, Get out there and actually throw yourself into the fray. You're going to screw up if you just start doing it. But that's what you have to do in order to get better. And so you have to screw up, and then it's like falling off a horse. You just get back on, and now you'll know a little bit better how to ride it.
I was always scared of horses. Made me nervous. I think I made them nervous.
Yeah. Horses are pretty scary.
Yeah, but I'm not scared of gear. I'm not scared of turning the speakers up really loud. All right, so Rob, now how about sharing with the rock stars a recording tip, hack, or secret sauce, something that listeners could use today in the studio?
I always like taking stuff that I find around the house or around the studio in the kitchen or whatever, and throwing it on the piano. That's always fun. That's kind of boring.
You mean like treated piano kind of stuff?
Oh, yeah, or hanging stuff. I don't know. I like
Well, let's stick to the piano one. So for somebody who's never done that before, what does that mean? What would you do?
It means you can put silverware on the piano and then play it. Sorry,
but literally,
guys, I've done
on
that.
the strings of the piano,
Yeah, on the
piano.
strings of the grand piano.
Yeah, you can lay the silverware across those strings. When you hit the note, they go bzz, bzz, jangle, and all that when you're playing the part, right?
Yeah, that's kind of fun.
That's an awesome trick. I love that stuff.
I like, running running an acoustic, EBO on an acoustic guitar is always something that's really cool.
And Rockstars, if you haven't used an EBO before, it's a handheld battery-controlled device that you hold down to the string, and it causes the string to just resonate endlessly. Yeah. You don't have to pluck it anymore. It just plays forever. Yeah.
That kind of a thing.
How about something cool for the drums?
Well, you can always put little strings of beads and stuff on the drums, or
what that reminds me of the session I did with Ross Rice when we were doing Big Notebook for Easy Piano for the Fluid Ounces, and Ross went out there and he took a box of like Uncle Ben's rice and poured it all over the floor tom. And then when we'd hit it, the rice would just fly up in the air and it would come landing down again. You get this great sound all over the drum. So there's one.
Yeah.
All right. Well, so Rob, how about a favorite hardware tool for the studio? So this would be something physical that when you're doing recording sessions, you're kind of always glad you've got it.
Well, it's always nice to have mic stands. And
okay, fair enough. Any good advice on mic stands that you got for people? Should they spend thousands of dollars on the most expensive mic stands out there, or?
It's always nice if you can have good mic stands. My partner Patrick Dampier, he's really good at eBay searching, and he gets these old Atlas stands that are like vintage stuff that it really is made so much better than the stuff you get up at. You can find this stuff. You might as well get it.
As far as mic stands go, the Atlas stand is a big, super heavy-duty stand that has wheels on it. So if you got a
not
big
necessarily.
space,
I think they made small ones too with silver bottoms.
Yeah,
and,
but they're really solid, and
they're
really,
really solid and well made. They're not.
Your mics aren't going to fall
They're
over
not
and go
these
down to the
hollow,
floor.
poor excuse for mic stands. But it
You
really
mean like the ones
matter.
we're using right now for
the
our
ones
podcasting mics?
Oh yeah, these.
But I'm going to
these are the
encourage
cheesy
you,
ones.
rock stars, too. When I need just a bunch of stands, I find the cheap stands work pretty great for most of the mics in the studio. Not maybe for the expensive tube mics, but they work pretty great for all the mic stands you might need to go around the drum kit and stuff like that. And so when I've needed to just have a lot of stands, I remember I would just go to musician's friend and order the 10-pack for $100 or whatever. They might not last that long, but sometimes it's nice to just have a lot of stands around. All right, so Robin, how about sharing a favorite software tool? Just anything you want to tell people about, hit people to. Something cool.
Something cool in the software department. Well, of course, all the UAD plugins are really sweet, and they have, I like using their reverbs and the tape machines that you can actually see a tape machine whirring around, and you can do the same stuff you can do with a tape machine. You can bias it in a weird way, and if you want to make it all squonky and sounds like getting tape distortion.
How about the DAW? What kind of DAWs do you like to work with?
Well, I work on Pro Tools as my DAW.
Pro Tools is my DAW.
Yeah, but I've been hearing there's other DAWs out there that are sort of starting to take off.
How about other songwriters? When you co-write with people and they've been recording songs at home, do they always show up with a Pro Tools session version of it, or have you seen anything else that tends to be used for creational?
Yeah, I mean, well, Logic is, everybody's using, has Logic in their repertoire now. And, Melodyne is something that is pretty useful as well to know. You know that very well, because I hire you to do Melodyne for me.
It's a great tool.
It is.
Well, so now, Rob, how about sharing a favorite resource for organizational stuff? I know that's one of the challenges with songwriting and everything else. You've got a lot of stuff to keep track of. Any good tools, maybe online tools or software that you like to use to just kind of keep it all organized?
Yeah, I mean, I like to use Notes, and I like to use Evernote, and that's about as far as I go.
When you say Notes, you're talking about notes in your iPhone?
My iPhone.
Okay, cool.
And
you talked about using voice memo too.
Yeah, voice memo is without that I would be dead.
Do you use voice memo when you're recording your guitar and singing, or do you?
Yeah.
Okay.
And when I'm working with other songwriters, it's really great and it sounds really good too. Sometimes you think, God, this is almost good enough to release.
And then you go record it with a regular mic and it doesn't have all that compression and
it sounds crappy.
All right, cool. So what about the business side of this stuff? I know that the business side is your favorite part of all.
Oh, God.
What advice do you have for the rock stars about, if they're doing this and it's not just a hobby, what advice do you have for them for us staying in the game,
Yeah. Well, I've been lucky enough to work with some really good people who have taken care of the business without really having to have contracts and stuff. I'm currently working on a contract that's kind of it's a difficult one because it's starting at this point with a couple of partners and stuff. And it's important to get stuff down on paper if you're going to be working with other people and there's money involved. My feeling is that the business of music has changed so much, and really going out there and actually being in people's faces and actually going and meeting the people is a really important thing. And I don't think that we would have gotten the Butterfly or the Spinto or whatever deals that we got without going and meeting these people that are trying to reach out to the music community, because they may not be able to do the music themselves, but they want to help out.
Right. So we're talking about Mr. Mike Dixon at this point, too.
Yeah, Mike Dixon has been a great help to me over the years, and he travels all over the world, and he knows pretty much everybody, and he's been my sort of manager, helpmate, and also my friend, and we've done a bunch of stuff together and made some money.
Yeah.
And but also if you can make friends with people that have labels and that have, booking agencies, and those are the people that they're looking for things. They're looking for you. I know that like Lidge, when the guy from Bonnaroo came to Alex the Great, and, you were there and you actually ran a session, and that was how you got your gig. It's kind of like being in the room with these people and actually interacting with them and letting them, kind of feel who you are, your vibe.
Yeah. I was there at the right time when an opportunity came along that I could grab it. And then, then 12 years of hard work later.
Like to say something else, never underestimate anyone that you meet, because you're going to meet all kinds of people in your travels that are, you might think that they're not important and you might blow them off. But those people might be the people that are going to want to hire you in another 5-10 years. And they'll go, oh, you're the guy. I remember you. You kind of blew me off, Right. And I think it's really important to always be, thinking, you never know who's going to come around and be the next big A&R guy or booking agent or rock stars.
Yeah, indeed. Well, all right, Rob. So now how about if you were going to advise people who are maybe starting out, or if you were starting out again and you needed a simple setup to record with, you needed to meet people. I guess you kind of answered that one, and you needed to make ends meet. What would you suggest to somebody? I mean, you're a parent. If you were advising somebody who's just starting out in this, what should they spend their money on to record with so they can start?
I think something really simple. It would probably be a digital
laptop and an interface.
And, you can learn how to be a wire jockey pretty quick on those things. And just the simplest of the simple.
Yeah,
it just takes a guitar, a voice, and your cell phone. There are 4 tracks on the cell phone that you can use. And if you write a good song, everybody's going to know it's a good song.
That's good advice, man. You talked about doing a 4-track cassette recorder and getting a deal. You weren't even in the room, And I know that environment is different now with the business, but certainly on an iPhone, you can record multi-track.
It's not really different. The thing about getting a deal now, it's different because they usually go to Spotify playlists and they see who's made a record that gets, 1 million plays on Spotify without a record deal. And those are the people they get interested in. So it's kind of frustrating for somebody from my generation who used to actually deal with a human being who is relating to what they hear and not just looking at the statistics out there. So we're up against the statistics now. But I think that there are still people. I know some people. I'm working with a guy who has Marathon Music in London. I'm going to fly over there and write with his wife, who I'm making a record with Brad Jones as well. It's kind of great because I can just feel this guy's an old school type dude, He probably looks at statistics too, but, he's like somebody that he can relate to, They're out there. They all just want to find something great.
Yeah. All right, Rob. So this one's hypothetical too. If you could go back and give yourself, young Robin, just landing in New York or going off to Europe, one bit of advice, and you were able to tell yourself, what's the single most important thing you need to know to be a rock star of the recording studio? What would you say?
I would say, if I had any regrets at all, it's that I didn't get up and do it sooner. There were a couple of times when I was offered an opportunity and I said, no, I'm not ready yet. Now I would never say that. Say yes until you absolutely have to say no, but always jump in. There's a kid here he's probably 21 and he's running a Steely Dan tour. He's running the house. And I was saying, wow, how'd you get that? He said, well, I just wrote him and told him that I was an engineer in England. He's an English guy. He said, I told him I really was a big fan. And they said, well, why don't you come and try it out, and we'll see. And he ended up getting the gig.
That's great. Yeah.
21 years old.
Ambitious.
Ambitious. And just like,
I could barely write a letter at 21. Wait a minute. Maybe I can barely write a letter today. I'm working on it anyway.
You were always really pretty prescient in your 20s, man.
Yeah.
I knew you then.
Well, I mean, you know, I felt ambitious to call you and Brad up at Alex the Great and just out of the yellow pages and just say I really liked the record and I wanted to come down in there and meet you guys. And I was looking for
Well, that's
work
the other
and all that
thing
kind of
is,
stuff.
see, that was why you got the gig, was because you called. And anyone who calls, it's not just us, you know, any ambitious person who reaches out to somebody that they admire will often, the door will open. A little bit anyway, and then get your foot in, and like Lidge did, he kicked the door open and you know, took the world.
There's a great suggestion by Tim Ferriss in his book, The 4-Hour Workweek, where he talks about the power of sometimes everybody's clamoring for the middle ground, and sometimes it's easier to sort of reach straight for the top. So in the example of me trying to reach out to you guys, you know, just calling you up as opposed to, I don't know what the middle ground might have been. Maybe it would have just been like, you know, playing shows and being around town and getting to know you and meet you and hoping for something. Whereas just calling you up and saying, hey, I want to come there and work for you guys was a different thing.
For free.
But sometimes it is
helps.
easier to just kind of go for the most challenging, you know, the reach for the rarefied air, I guess, right?
Exactly. And a lot of times it's like the most beautiful girl never really gets called, you know, because people are all, oh, shit, I can't call her, you know. But she's just waiting for somebody to call her because she doesn't have anything to do.
Call me up.
Call me up.
Well, Robin, thank you so much for being here on Recording Studio Rockstars with us.
Thank you.
Can you let our listeners know how they can find you and follow you and learn more about your music?
Yeah. Well, my email is eaton.robin@gmail.com. My telephone number is 615-364-4832. So that's pretty much all you really need to know. And come see us at Club Aurora and Alex the Great. And if you're in Nashville, just give me a call. I'd love to talk to anybody.
Groovy, groovy. Well, Robin, thank you so much, man. Pleasure to hang out with you. I think we need to go get some delicious lunch somewhere now.
Let's do it.
All right. See you around the studio. Cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, please leave a rating and review on iTunes to help reach more people. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to recordingstudiorockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And if you want more free content, all you have to do is text RS Rockstars to 33444. Again, that's RS Rockstars to 33444, and I'll keep you in the loop with articles, videos, and podcast updates. And I'll let you know about any upcoming giveaway offers, all totally free. Thanks for listening. I'm Lidge Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music.